Once again, Christian greetings to all our valued listeners and viewers throughout the whole world, even more particularly to all Shepherd's Rod believers, and most especially to our beloved brothers and sisters in the United States of America. Special greetings to our brethren in Colorado, to our brethren on Georgia, and also to our brethren in Kansas, and on Fiji Island, Mexico, Spain, in Africa, to the United Kingdom, and also to our brethren in Australia, and to the rest of the 144,000 living saints scattered abroad. Greetings. May the good Lord bless you, brothers and sisters. This is our episode number 13 on the subject, the chronological order of events. And it is especially dedicated to our beloved brother Steve and Sister Corinne, together with the brethren. And at this time, I want to emphasize greatly the importance of this coming Day of Atonement, for it is a life and death matter by which on that final Day of Atonement, the destiny of all spiritual Israel will be forever fixed. So I would like to begin on track number 15 on page 28. It says, in the typical atonement, everyone's destiny among the professed people of God was forever fixed. Those who complied with the demands of the law were left to live, and those who did not were cut off from among the people. Thus it must also be in the antitypical atonement. Track number 15, page 28. So what is the demand of the law? Of course, anciently, they were commanded to afflict their soul so that they will not be cut off on that Day of Atonement. So that is one of the demands of the law. Now, I would like to read here and to us are 218 and 219. It says, in the earthly sanctuary, the high priest entered the most holy apartment once a year, and on that particular day, every Israelite was to confess his sin. He who neglected to comply with the divine requirements was cut off from his people. See Leviticus 23 verse 29 and verse 30. Thus, the day of antitypical atonement, judgment, or cleansing of the sanctuary, as set forth in Daniel 8 verse 14, is a day of purification for the camp of Israel, the church, putting away sin and sinners. The earthly sanctuary was a figure of the heavenly. It was instituted with its ceremonial system to point forward to the work of Christ, our high priest, in the heavenly sanctuary during the antitypical period, New Testament time. As the sanctuary with all its services was a figure of type of the true heavenly under the administration of Christ, so the typical Day of Atonement must point out the truth in the antitypical period, our time. 2SR 218 and 219. We know that according to track number 15, the basis of the proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary, its righteousness is measured according to the present truth. So here in track number 15, page 32, it says, the lamps of fire, being 7 in number, they of course can but represent the ever-living church. Revelation 1 verse 20. Clothed with the light of the whole truth of God, her teaching present truth to its successive generation since the world began. The truth by which the works of each is searched and judged, its one's righteousness measured. Track number 15, page 32. So, the righteousness of each is measured according to the present truth. Now, I would like to read to you 2TG 37 on page 25. It is concerning Isaiah 52 verse 1 and 7 as well as Nahum chapter 1 verse 15. Now it says, hear the prophetic word of God, 2TG 37, page 25. Hear the prophetic word of God plainly declares by both Isaiah and Nahum, the prophets, that when we see these good tidings published by him whose feet are seen upon the mountains, and this is now taking place for the first time since the prophets wrote, it is to be a sign that the wicked, the violators of the laws of Moses, are soon to be cut off from among God's people. So it says here that the wicked, who are they the wicked? The violators of the laws of Moses. They are soon to be cut off from among God's people. 2TG 37:25. Now, what are the laws of Moses? Now, let us go to 2TG 37 on pages 14 and page 15 to ascertain clearly what are the laws of Moses by which the violators of such laws are to be cut off according to the voice of inspiration. So here in 2TG 37, pages 14 and 15, quoting Malachi 4, verse 4 and 5. It says, remember ye the law of Moses, my servant, which I commanded unto him in Horeb, for all Israel, with the statutes and judgments. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Now, we know that this is partially fulfilled in the days of Bethel, being antitypical Elijah John the Baptist. But it is even more directly applied to antitypical Elijah the Tishbite. Here in tract number 13, page 11, it says, remember ye all who shall witness the destruction of the wicked described above. Remember, we already read in 2TG 37:25 that the wicked mentioned are the violators of the laws of Moses. Now the divine command, remember ye all who shall witness the destruction of the wicked described above. It did not say all who had been witnessed, but rather inscribed in a future tense. All who shall witness the destruction of the wicked described above. Or it is guaranteed by inspiration that these people they will witness the destruction of the wicked. Who are they, the wicked? The violators of the laws of Moses. Although, we know, all the wicked will be destroyed, but this is the very first destruction. It is pointing to the violators of the laws of Moses among God's people. But at the time by which they were commanded to observe the law of Moses, of course, that is the time before such destruction. And the reason that they have been commanded to observe, so that they will not be among those people that will be destroyed because of violating the laws of Moses. Then it says, this command to keep the law which Moses received in Horeb is according to the scriptures to all who are to be living in the great and dreadful day of the Lord. What is great and dreadful day of the Lord? Judgment for the living. So it points out to the people by which they live in that period of time. The period of the judgment that pertains to the living. Without any doubts, it must be pointing to the saints that will no longer to taste death. And Bethihotep himself plainly declared that such event was still future in his days. Here in answerer number 3, on page 88, it says, and looking forward to the time of the great and dreadful day of the Lord, the time just ahead of us, the Lord admonishes the people who will be living at that time. So such divine command is directly addressed to the people living in the period of time by which God sends his last prophet, antitypical Elijah that is by the prophet in the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And Bethihotep died before that period of time. So, this message is directly addressed to the saints that will no longer to taste death. Now, let us read 2TG 37, pages 14 and 15. You know by now that Malachi, chapters 3 and 4, prophetically speak to the people of today. But in reality, the word today is applied today, this year, rather than in the days of Bethihotep. Now, I would like to read again, 2TG 37, pages 14 and 15. You know by now that Malachi, chapters 3 and 4, prophetically speak to the people of today, to the people just before the great and dreadful day, to the people to whom antitypical Elijah the prophet is sent. So that is inscribed in present tense. The time when antitypical Elijah the prophet, antitypical Elijah that is by, is sent. If you will be saying that that is Bethihotep, then you could no longer apply this grammar because Bethihotep was already gone. And it says, and what wise counsel does the Lord give through Malachi? He says, remember ye the law of Moses, my servant. Which law? The law of statutes and judgments, which the Lord commanded in Horeb. Since this is God's faithful advice to His people of this day, we would do well to re-study this law of Moses and to remember it, for we cannot disregard His counsel and still expect His blessings. Broadly speaking, the law of Moses consists of three parts. The first is the ceremonial law, the law of the temple, the sacrificial law. This law, of course, we today must not observe except in antitype, for it foreshadowed things to come, particularly Christ's first advent. Thus it is that if we had lived in Old Testament times and had failed to comply with the sacrificial law and system of that day, we would thereby have demonstrated unbelief in Christ, who was to come. But since we are living in the Christian era, if we should now observe the typical sacrificial law and system, we should thereby demonstrate unbelief in Christ, who has come. Many Davidians misconstrued this paragraph. Brothers and sisters, there is no such proof at all that when Jesus Christ died on the cross, the holy feasts were abolished. The only thing that had been abolished is the sacrifices, the sacrificial law, not the holy feast. Brothers and sisters, because the statement given here, there are two things that have been mentioned here. The sacrificial law and also the law of the temple. The law of the temple, brothers and sisters, will be forever be observed. There is a law of the temple, and that is concerning the ceremonial law, which does not refer alone to the sacrifices, to the burnt offerings, but rather even directly pointing to the holy feast. Now, I would like to read to you Patriarchs and Prophets, 365. It says here, the ceremonial system, Patriarchs and Prophets, page 365. The ceremonial system was made up of symbols pointing to Christ, to His sacrifice and His priesthood. This ritual law, with its sacrifices and ordinances, was to be performed by the Hebrews until type meet antitype in the death of Christ, the Lamb of God that taketh away the sin of the world. Then all the sacrificial offerings were to cease. So what had been ceased in the death of Jesus Christ? The sacrificial offerings, not the holy feast, my dear brothers and sisters, because the apostles, they observed the holy feast. And if we'll be saying that the holy feast had been nailed to the cross, then the apostles erroneously observe the holy feast, if that is the case. But there is no other people by which they have complete understanding concerning the death of Christ except the apostles. And they knew, brothers and sisters, that the only thing that had been nailed to the cross, it is the burnt offerings. Here in Acts of the Apostles, in 389, it says, Paul greatly desired to reach Jerusalem before the Passover, as he would thus have an opportunity to meet those who should come from all parts of the world to attend the feast. In page 390, it says, I would like to read a statement. Upon receiving warning of the plot, Paul decided to go to around by way of Macedonia. His plan to reach Jerusalem in time for the Passover services had to be given up, but he hoped to be there at Pentecost. Then in the last paragraph it says, at Philippi, Paul tarried to keep the Passover. So Apostle Paul kept the Passover. Only Luke remained with him. The other members of the company passing on to Troas to await him there. The Philippians were the most loving and true-hearted of the apostles' converts, and during the 8 days of the feast, he enjoyed peaceful and happy communion with them. Acts of the Apostles 389, 390, and 391. And the only one who take away the holy feast is not Jesus Christ, but rather it is the exceeding great horn during the dark ages. I would like to read 2 TG number 6 on page 20 and page 21. It says, from these verses we see that it was just such a departure from God, because of departure from God, that caused the church in her early Christian era to lose her path and all her possessions, including her feast days, her new moons, her Sabbaths, and all her solemn feasts. Why is it that the solemn feast was lost? Because of departure from God. And that was during the dark ages of religion. It says, this is exactly what happened when the dark ages of religion began. 2 TG number 6, page 20 and page 21. And also in track number 4, page 25 and page 26. Now, remember, brothers and sisters, the statement in 2 TG 37 on page 15, it says, this law, what law? The ceremonial law. This law, of course, we today must not observe except in antitype. Brothers and sisters, the Old Testament period is not the period of antitype. When does the period of antitype? Let us read again. 2 SR 219. It says 218 and 219. It was instituted, 2 SR 218 and 219. It was instituted with its ceremonial system to point forward to the work of Christ, our high priest, in the heavenly sanctuary during the antitypical period, New Testament time. When does the antitypical period begins? In the New Testament era. So the statement that the ceremonial law must be observed in the antitype, brothers and sisters, it could not be referring to the burnt offerings because the burnt offerings is observed in the typical period, not in the antitypical period. So let us distinctly separate that event, brothers and sisters, concerning the burnt offerings, the sacrificial law, the sacrificial system. It was observed in the typical period, not in the antitypical period. But there is a great meaning in this statement in 2 TG 37:15 saying this law, remember it is not the moral law mentioned here. It is the ceremonial law. This law, of course, we today must not observe, meaning in the days of Beti-Hotep, that law must not be observed, except in antitype. When does the antitypical period? New Testament time. So what law to be observed in the antitype? The Holy Feast. Because the apostles observed the Holy Feast. When does the Holy Feast, when does the antitypical period begins? New Testament time, from 31 AD onwards. And that is why it was demonstrated that the Apostolic Church observed, brothers and sisters, the Holy Feast. But why is it that Beti-Hotep as well as Ellen G. White did not observe the Holy Feast? Because in the picture, while God's people are still in Goshen, they did not observe the Holy Feast. Now, I would like to read that statement given by the Shepherd's Rod. Here in 1 SR 115 and 116, it says, the experience, 1 SR 115 and 116, the experience of the children of Israel in Egypt was a photograph of our denomination. Thus, their experience is being reproduced in every particular with these people. So the experience of ancient Israel while in Egypt, it says the experience of the children of Israel in Egypt was a photograph of our denomination. Thus, their experience is being reproduced in every particular with these people. Where is the specific place by which God's people anciently reside? It was in Goshen. Now, what is antitypical Goshen? Let us read 1 SR page 76. It says, the land of Goshen. The beginning of this denomination was typified by Israel's entrance into Egypt as previously explained. We shall now consider the truth of the land of Goshen. Joseph brought Israel into Egypt and gave them the part of the land to dwell in, which was the best land in the country of Egypt. And there Joseph now raised them, their flocks, herds, and cattle, and all they had. Genesis 45 verse 10. The land of Goshen stands as a symbol of the United States of America in which the church came into existence. So what is the land of Goshen? That is symbolized by the United States of America, brothers and sisters. So, here in 2SR 275, let us read. To SR page 275, it says, you will also note on page 222 that the 430 prophetic years originally applied to Abraham and his seed. And it says, overlap the 430 of Ezekiel chapter 4. The 430 years of Ezekiel should terminate in 1929 or 1930. But the perfect fulfillment of the prophetic period of Abraham in its antitype is yet in the future, going out of Egypt. That is very plain, that prophetic event in its antitype is still in the future. Israel going out of Egypt. Now, here in 1SR 101, it says, it has been made clear that Israel after the flesh is a photograph of Israel by the promise. In the Exodus movement, all the tribes went out of Egypt. If this is a photograph of Israel by the promise, then all the 12 tribes must come out now as well. But that statement must come out now, brothers and sisters, of course, it must be pointing to the predicted event. Because B.T. Hotep says it is still future. So when that predicted event will come, then that is the time that God commanded His people to get out of Egypt. And what is the type? It says that they might observe a feast in the wilderness. So that is the very clear, brothers and sisters. Let us read Exodus. Here in Exodus chapter, I would like to read Patriarchs and Prophets. Here in Patriarchs and Prophets on page. So, the message says, 757, in the command for Israel's release, the Lord said to Pharaoh, Israel is my son, even my firstborn. Let my son go that he may serve me. But in Exodus chapter 5, it says that they might make me a feast in the wilderness. Exodus chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. Now, this is the statement. It says, the psalmist tells us why God delivered Israel from Egypt. He brought forth His people with joy and His chosen with gladness and gave them the lands of the heathen. And they inherited the labor of the people that they might observe His statutes and keep His laws. Psalms 105, 43 to 45. Here we learn that the Hebrews could not serve God in Egypt. So that is very plain, brothers and sisters. But how about in the antitype? The Shepherd's Rod says, our generation is even more wicked. Thus, God's people could be able to serve God, to observe all the laws of Moses while they were still in Egypt. Now, I would like to read this reading, brethren, in 1SR. On page 64, it says, the experience of the Israelites in departing from Egypt, 1 SR page 64. This experience of the Israelites in departing from Egypt was written for the instruction of those who should live in the last days, before the overflowing scourge shall come upon the dwellers of the earth. The Lord calls upon all who are Israelites indeed to prepare for that event. Volume 6, page 195. We need to prepare for that event. What event? The fulfillment of the departure from Egypt. And what specific place that they departed? Goshen. And what is Goshen? United States of America. Now, let us go back again, brothers and sisters, because we are studying now type and antitype. Sister White and Betty Hotep, they were living in a period of time by which typifying ancient Israel, while in Goshen, they did not observe the holy feast. Or, in other words, God did not give a command to them to observe the holy feast. Not until God commanded Moses to take out his people from the Egyptian bondage and then to observe the feast in the wilderness. Now, it is a very important subject, brothers and sisters. All the events that will take place on the year 2021 and also the year 2022, these 2 years, 2021, 2022, are very important years. If we would miss these 2 years, we will miss forever. And that predicted event cannot be referred only to one angle. It is illustrated by God in different angles, with many pictures, with many types, that we need to reconcile and to harmonize to get the full beam of light. Now, of all the feast, the very first important, before we will be delivered physically, we need to be delivered spiritually. And it is even more pointing to the Day of Atonement. Now, I would like to read to you this reading, brothers and sisters, in 1 TG. 1 TG number 3, page 15. Saying, thus urging Judah, the church, to keep this antitypical atonement feast. So this message is very urgent It says, brothers and sisters, that thus urging Judah, the church, now I would like to repeat again to connect our subject. Who is the church mentioned here, represented by the title Judah? It must be the church in the great and dreadful day of the Lord. According to our reading, right? Track number 13, page 11, to TG 37, 14, and 15. Who are they that had been commanded to observe the holy feast? To the people living in the great and dreadful day of the Lord. What is great and dreadful day of the Lord? The judgment that pertains to the living. The message by which never been bestowed by God to Sister White. The Jefferson declared clearly in General Conference Special on page 39. He says, the judgment for the dead, furthermore, is not the message of the great and dreadful day. It does not even touch on the prophecies of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Does not even touch. Therefore, it could not be the church during the great and dreadful day of the Lord. The church in the great and dreadful day of the Lord, it must be the church by which unto them was bestowed the knowledge concerning the judgment that pertains to the living. I would like to connect this reading in 1 TG. 1 TG number 22, page 24. 1 TG number 22, page 24. The meek of the earth are those who have wrought the Lord's judgments, who have proclaimed the message of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. It could not be the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Because according to the General Conference Special, page 39, the message that was entrusted by God to the Seventh-day Adventist Church do not even touch the message of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Now it says here, 1 TG 22, page 24. The meek of the earth are those who have brought the Lord's judgments, who have proclaimed the message of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. They are His people, His church. So brothers and sisters, the church mentioned here must be the church in the judgment that pertains to the living. Not the church in the judgment that pertains to the dead. The church in the judgment that pertains to the dead, the one in church is the angel. But the church in the judgment that pertains to the living, the one in church is Joshua, not the angel. According to the Shepherd's Rod, in 1 TG number 8, right? 1 TG number 8 on page. And also, that church is the church that proclaimed the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And The Seventh-day Adventist Church never proclaimed the great and dreadful day of the Lord. It says here in 1 TG number 8, page 24, obviously, then as a result of this revival and reformation within the Laodicean church, who launched that revival and reformation within the Laodicean church? B.T. Hotep. The revival and reformation that had been launched since 1930 within the Laodicean church, it says, as a result, meaning the final outcome. It says, obviously, then as a result, meaning the product, the outcome of that revival and reformation within the Laodicean church, another church emerges of which Joshua is in charge, not the angel of Laodicea. 1 TG number 8, page 24. Another church emerges of which is Joshua is in charge, not the angel of Laodicea. And that church that emerged, that is the result, the outcome, the product of that revival and reformation that had been launched in 1930 to 1955. Now let us go back to our subject, brothers and sisters. As I've said, this coming Day of Atonement, the last and the final Day of Atonement, is very critical. And that's why we need to study closely, brothers and sisters. Now let's read 2 TG. Here in 2 TG 42, page 41. Let's read. 2 TG 42, page 41. The prophet Nahum too is a witness to this call for reformation. He writes. So what call is this? The call for reformation. Behold upon the mountains the feet of him that bringeth good tidings, that publisheth peace, O Judah. Keep thy solemn feast. Perform thy vows, for the wicked shall no more pass through thee. He is utterly cut off. Here you see that the announcement of this long-expected event is to be made by someone's publications. Now, I would like to apply first that publications, the Shepherd's Rod publications. Moreover, he publishes peace and thus announces the restoration of the kingdom. This is the only peace that the world can have. There is to be no other. Those who keep God's solemn feast, inscribed in plural form. Those who keep God's solemn feast and perform their vows shall have this peace. None other shall. Brothers and sisters, of course, the statement published peace, that is complete peace and rest in God's everlasting kingdom. And of course, logically, the time by which he published peace is the time when that kingdom will soon, very soon, will be established. And who are they that will be a part of that everlasting kingdom? Only those who keep God's solemn feast. Because the violators of the laws of Moses will be cut off. So this solemn feast, brothers and sisters, in 2 TG 37:25, is the holy feast that was given by God to Moses. Now, let me read to you track number 14, page 22. It says, therefore, only as they awake and give heed to the voice of the true witness and turn their steps toward the gates of the kingdom, may they ever hope to participate in the divine eventuality. You see, brothers and sisters, to participate in the divine eventuality. O Judah, keep thy solemn feast, perform thy vows. Why is it that you need to keep the solemn feast? Why is it that you need to perform our vows to the Lord? So that we will not be among of that wicked that will be cut off on that coming day of atonement. Track number 14, page 22. I would like to read answerer number 3. Page 9 and page 10. It says, thus the all-knowing one, he who created the heavenly bodies and knows the very moment he set them in motion to govern the day, the month, and the year, decreed that the holy feast be observed in the very month and on the very day on which were first ordained. And what happened to ancient Israel when they were in Egyptian bondage for 215 years? They lost sight of the Bible creation calendar. Therefore, there is no more possibility of them that they could be able to observe the holy feast. So at the time that God requires them to observe the holy feast, God gave to Moses the sacred yearly calendar. It says here in page 10, to prevent his people from bringing upon themselves such a catastrophe and to have them intelligent as to the time the year begins, the Lord gave to Moses the sacred yearly calendar which cannot be lost or miscalculated so long as the earth remains. And then it says, thus was the Lord re-establishing the creation calendar. What does it mean, re-establishing? It was already in the past, but it was lost. So before God's people could observe the holy feast, God need to restore first the Bible or the creation calendar. And the mere fact that Bethotep died and God did not bestow unto him concerning the knowledge of the creation Bible calendar, first, God did not require them to observe the holy feast. Otherwise, the type and antitype could no longer exactly fit and perfectly match. Because the picture, the type, they did not observe the holy feast while in Goshen, and they observed the holy feast at the time when they departed from Goshen, and while they were in the wilderness. And according to the shepherd's rod, in 1 TG number 28, let's read. It says here, page 15, 1 TG number 28, page 15, this message, therefore, is the one that precedes the harvest of the earth, the great and dreadful day of the Lord, the judgment for the living. What is the great and dreadful day of the Lord? The judgment for the living, the day in which all things are to be restored. Mark chapter 9, verse 12. What is the great and dreadful day of the Lord? The judgment for the living. That is the appointed time by which all things are to be restored. And one of the prominent truths that was not restored in the days of Bethihotep is the Bible creation calendar. It is God who will restore all things, but through the medium and the channel of the prophet. And the mere fact that not all things have been restored in the days of Bethihotep, he could not be the promised antitypical Elijah the Tishbite. Here in the General Conference Special, on page, let's read. On page 11 and page 19 and page 20. General Conference Special, pages 19 and page 20. In doing all this, he sets in motion the power that is to restore all things. I would like to read again. General Conference Special, page 19 and page 20. In doing all this, he sets in motion the power that is to restore all things. Hence, Christ's positive declaration, Elijah truly shall first come and restore all things. Matthew 17:11, inevitably then, without his message, we would die in our ignorance and in our sins, never live to see the restoration completed. Without his message, one of the most important messages of antitypical Elijah the Tishbite, brothers and sisters, is the great and dreadful day of the Lord, the judgment for the living, which is the blotting out of the names of the wicked. Dreadful to those whose names are blotted out, but great to those people by which their names retain in the Lamb's Book of Life. Now, I would like to connect our study, brothers and sisters, on the prophecy on, I know there are many prophecies that we need to consider, but I would like to connect on Isaiah 65. Ponder deeply, brothers and sisters, this prophecy recorded. I would like to read 1 SR 163. 1 SR 163 and 164. So let's read the statement and hope that God would help us. It says, the 10th verse, so pointing to Isaiah 65 verse 10. 1 SR 163. The 10th verse speaks of the promise to those who shall escape. So there is a promise to those who shall escape. And the Gideon, when reading the word escape, immediately they jump to the conclusion that it points out to the day of slaughtering. Well, brothers and sisters, that is not wrong. But that is not the particular object in view. Because in 1 TG, let's read again. In 1 TG number 6, page 38, it says, it is obvious that they escape the destruction of these sinners in the church. 1 TG number 6, page 38. So it is obvious that they escape the destruction of these sinners in the church. Who are they? Only the holy ones whose names are left written in the book escape the destruction that falls upon the wicked in the church. Only they constitute the remnant, the ones that are left. Who are they that will escape the destruction? Only those whose names are left written in the book escape the destruction. So this is the promise to you and I if our names will be retained in the Lamb's Book of Life. This is the promise. Now I would like to read 1 SR page 163. It says, the 10th verse speaks of the promise to those who shall escape. Now let us read Isaiah 65 verse 10. This is the promise. And Sharon shall be a fold of flocks, and the valley of Achor a place for the herds to lie down in, for my people that have sought me. So that is the promise given by God to those who shall escape. Now, then it says, the 11th and 12th verses speak of the class that shall perish. So verse 11 and verse 12 is pointing, it says, the 11th and 12th verses speak of the class that shall perish. The slaughter here is the same as that of Ezekiel 9. Quoting Isaiah 65 verse 12, therefore will I number you to the sword, and ye shall all bow down to the slaughter. Because when I called, ye did not answer. When I spake, ye did not hear, but did evil before mine eyes, and did choose that wherein I delighted not. Then it says, verses 13 and 14 show God's care over His people and the suffering of the other class. Now let us distinctly separate the class mentioned in 11 and 12 and the class mentioned in verse 13 and 14. Brothers and sisters, in verse 13 and 14, there are two classes. Let us read again the statement. 1 SR page 163. Verses 13 and 14 show God's care over His people and the suffering of the other class. Verse 15, and ye shall leave your name for a curse unto my chosen. For the Lord God shall slay thee, and call His servants by another name. Now, let us connect to track number 14. Track number 14. So let us read the statement here. Track number 14, 17 and 18. And it shall come to pass in that day, declares the prophet, that his burden, the burden of Assyria, shall be taken away from off thy shoulder, the shoulder of Judah, and his yoke from off thy neck, and the yoke shall be destroyed because of the anointing. Isaiah 10 verse 27. On page 18 it says, immediately we see that in the revealing light of this scripture, the pronoun thee, who in both cases is set free in the time of Assyria's fall, proves to be the church, Judah, liberated from Gentile rule, the Assyrian rule. Conclusively, therefore, Isaiah clarifies Nahum's prophecy as referring to the church liberation from the last day Assyrian yoke. The fact, though, that the church, as Nahum says, is not only to be relieved from affliction and freed from bondage, but it is also to be sentenced to death. Nahum 1 verse 14 creates a paradox. Inspiration, however, quickly clears it again through Isaiah. Speaking of the church, he declares, and ye shall leave your name for a curse unto my chosen. For the Lord God shall slay thee, and call his servants by another name. Isaiah 65 verse 15. Who are they mentioned here? And ye shall leave your name for a curse unto my chosen. Brothers and sisters, there is no other group of people that inherits the name Seventh-day Adventist Church except the Davidian. So I would like to make illustration here. So, Seventh-day Adventist, this is the name mentioned. Who inherited that name? The Davidian. D is D. So let us read now the statement in Leviticus of the Davidian. Leviticus of the Davidian, page 4. The name Seventh-day Adventist, which this association inherits from the parent denomination, is provisional. Then the quotation is Isaiah 62 verse 2. And only for the duration of its work within the parent denomination. Now, ponder deeply, brothers and sisters. Within the parent denomination. That is the same with the statement. Revival and reformation within the church. Now, let us read 1 TG number 8. Page 24. Obviously, then, as a result of this revival and reformation, within the Laodicean church, or within the parent denomination, another church emerges, of which Joshua is in charge, not the angel of Laodicea. So there is a boundary line. There is a limited period of time. The name Seventh-day Adventist that had been inherited from the parent denomination, inherited by the Davidian, is provisional. What does it mean by the word provisional? How does the dictionary define the word provisional? Brothers and sisters, to repeat again, there is no other group under the sun who inherited the name Seventh-day Adventist except the Davidian. And Beti Hotep himself declared that clearly. But that name that they inherited is provisional. The word provision or provisional, temporary. So it is not, it must be, or other term is conditional or tentatively. So that's what it means. Now, when does that name must be dropped? I would like to read again, brothers and sisters, 1 SR 155. It says, a new name indicative of the new experience they have passed through, which is the separation or sifting, as explained. God himself with his own mouth gives the name, so it cannot be counterfeited. Brothers and sisters, in the Bible, there are three entities that their names were changed, and all of them are typical. Abram, then changed become Abraham. We have done diagram. Then Sarai, then the letter I was dropped and changed by letter H, become Sarah. And then Jacob to Israel. So there are three stages by which it is called the change name. Now, brothers and sisters, this event in the life of Abraham typified the Davidian because there is no letters that had been dropped but added, H and A. The same with the Davidian. The Seventh-day Adventist Church had not been dropped, but rather added with the word Davidian association. But how about the type of Sarai, then Sarah? It is very important because that is Isaiah 54, verse 1. The barren woman there. Ponder deeply, brothers and sisters. And if you could see that chart, brothers and sisters, no one could say that it is just a mere happenstance from how that period of time exactly fits. Now, I would like to continue reading here in 1SR 155. The time the name is received is at the end of the 430-year period, as explained on the chart on page 112 and 113. Thus, the church is reorganized under a new name. So, if it points to the 430 years, brothers and sisters, in the days of BT Hotep, the new name is typifying Abram to Abraham. The old name is Abram. The new name is Abraham. 2 extra letters had been added according to 1SR 233. But the statement here saying, thus the old name being polluted could no longer be retained. Brothers and sisters, the only one by which the name had been changed by dropping letter I and replaced by letter H, that is Sarai. And that is our experience. We did not know that the naming of this movement is found in prophecy. Because the name of this movement is the layman's movement of the Davidian Association. The name Seventh-day Adventist had been dropped as the fulfillment of this prophecy, my dear brothers and sisters. Because the name Seventh-day Adventist is provisional. Now, let us continue reading. It says, there is no one to go by the old name, for the ones who were not worthy of having the new name have perished under the figure of the 5 men with the slaughter weapons of Ezekiel 9. The name only remains for a curse. What name? By which if you will retain that name, it only bring a curse. Brothers and sisters, according to 1SR 100 and 101, I would like to read. 1SR page 100 and 101. And unto the angel of the church of the Laodiceans writes, I know thy works, that thou art neither cold nor hot. I would thou wert cold or hot. So then, because thou art lukewarm, and neither cold nor hot, I will spew thee out of my mouth. Revelation 3 verse 14 to 16. Note that the existence of the present name Seventh-day Adventist is conditional. What does it mean by conditional? It's up to them who inherited the name, or the fate or the future of that name is depend upon those who inherited the name. Who inherited the name? The Davidian. Apology, but this is the reality. The reason that God gave that name to the Davidian, inherited that name, is to lift up, brothers and sisters, the bad reputation that had been given by the Seventh-day Adventist Church of that name. Because historically, in selected messages, it says, are we ashamed of our name? No. What name? The name Seventh-day Adventist. It says 2SM 384. Not ashamed of our name. We are Seventh-day Adventists. Are we ashamed of our name? We answer, no, we are not. It is the name the Lord has given us. That name, Seventh-day Adventist, it is the Lord who gave that name. But what happened to that name? Greatly polluted with such abominations. And in order to rescue the honor of such name, to lift up, brothers and sisters, the bad reputation of that name, it was given by God, inherited by the Davidian. At the time when that name had been inherited by the Davidian, it is conditional. Whether it will bring blessing or whether it will bring curse. But 1,000 years ago, it was predicted beforehand. The one who inherits the name, the result is only a curse. Brothers and sisters, it is better for us to accept the reality than to evade the truth. Because it is the truth that shall set us free. I remember that B.T. Hodder says in 2 TG 17, on page 8, it is better for all of us to acknowledge our failures than to evade the truth. For it is the truth that shall make us free. The Davidian completely failed to lift up the bad reputation of that name, Seventh-day Adventist. But even worse, the Davidian is worse than the Seventh-day Adventist. Brothers and sisters, it is even more polluted among the Davidia, the one who inherited the name. So, Brother Holt have declared clearly that Judah who proclaimed the great and dreadful day of the Lord, God promised that God will liberate them. But it seems there is a paradox. Why is it that they are sentenced to death? According to track 14, page 18. It's so because, brothers and sisters, instead of inheriting the name Seventh-day Adventist, to raise up the bad reputation of that name, it only lead into a curse. Now, I would like to go back again, brothers and sisters, the statement in to us, our page 155. It says, the name only remains for a curse. Unto whom? Unto whom such name remains only for a curse. To them who did not know that the time came by which that name must be dropped. It should no longer be retained. When such name would be dropped? When that church emerges I would like to go back again to the reading. Brothers and sisters, let us read Leviticus of the Gibeon on page 4. The name Seventh-day Adventist, which this association inherits from the parent denomination, is provisional. What is the quotation? Isaiah 62 verse 2. What is Isaiah 62 verse 2? Meaning, up to the fulfillment of Isaiah 62 verse 2, the name Seventh-day Adventist, which this association inherits from the parent denomination, is provisional. Then quoted Isaiah 62 verse 2, and only for the duration of its work within the parent denomination. And only for the duration of its work within the parent denomination. As long as that duration, that period of time are still in progress, that name must still remain. But when that period of time will be ended, the name must be dropped. And those who still remain retaining that name, it will not bring blessings to them. It will only bring a curse, according to the Bible in the Spirit of Prophecy and the Shepherd's Rod publications. Now the question is that, when such period of time by which the time duration is already ended. So, it is very important, brothers and sisters, to understand that exact period of time. You remember our reading in 2SR, page 237. Let's read again. In 2SR, page 237, it says, the reason he has followed that particular rule is to present to his church the exact time of her history by periods. 2SR 237. What is the reason why God followed that particular rule? What particular rule? That 3 hours is schedule. The reason he has followed that particular rule is to present to his church. We already explained that the church mentioned here is the 11th hour church. 2SR 234. The exact time of her history by periods. Therefore, God's people, the 11th hour church, they completely knew their history by periods, according to that reading, because it is Jesus Christ who presented to them the exact time of her history by periods. Now, brothers and sisters, I think you will not disagree that the church that emerged of that revival and reformation resulted into that church that emerged is none other than the 11th hour church. By which in that reading, it is Joshua which is in charge. The high priest. Joshua is the high priest, right? according to the Bible and the Shepherd's Rod publications. Now, let us go back again to our reading, brothers and sisters, and I would like to focus first on, I think, Isaiah chapter 60. And this time, let us connect Isaiah 60. Reading words, White House Recruiter. White House Recruiter. On page 15, it says, finally, the night following the day can only represent the period after the gospel work is finished. After probation per month, salvation is closed. Then as the light of the world, the word of God sinks beyond the horizon of the day. Darkness covers the earth and gross darkness the people. Isaiah 60 verse 2. It is the time which finds the destiny of every being forever fixed. Then follows the Lord's irrevocable finality. He that is unjust, let him be unjust still, and he which is filthy, let him be filthy still, and he that is righteous, let him be righteous still, and he that is holy, let him be holy still. Revelation 22 verse 11. Now, ponder deeply, brothers and sisters. The night mentioned here is the commencement, when the sun sets. And according to the parable, that is the time by which God gave the reward to the 11th hour. Therefore, it could not be general close of provision. If you still remember our subject, brothers and sisters. Who are they to receive the reward, the 1 penny, the very first one? The 11th hour servants. And there are only two ways to grant immortality, that is by resurrection and by translation. And we explained already, brothers and sisters, that it cannot be applied from 1844 backwards. Now, let us read again the statement in White House Recruiter, page 15. It says, the truth is now become clear that the parable divides the time of salvation into two equal parts of 12 symbolical hours each. The period before the Bible, the night, and the period during the Bible, the day. Lending additional force to the fact that the parable thus divides time, Jesus declares, are there not 12 hours in the day? If any man walk during the day, he stumbleth not, because he is the light of this world. John 11 verse 9. Now, every one of us could easily understand the word equal. So it says here that the truth is now become clear that the parable divides the time of salvation into two equal parts of 12 symbolical hours each. 12 hours in the night time, 12 hours on the daylight. And the verse quoted is John 11 verse 9. Now, concerning the literal aspect, the only time by which the nighttime and the daylight are absolutely equal, that is called the vernal equinox. The third vernal equinox, brothers and sisters, that is pointing to the day, 24 hours, by which exactly 12 hours in the nighttime and 12 hours on the daylight, or exactly at 6 a.m. the sunrise, and at 6 p.m. the sun sets. And that is the illustration of the parable in Matthew 20. But it is figurative, brothers and sisters, not literal vernal equinox. There are only two literal vernal equinox and never happen again. If you will look up the so-called vernal equinox in the Gregorian calendar, it is erroneous because it is not equal. There is no such occurrence in the history that the sun rise exactly 6 a.m. It is 6:07 or 6:11, not exactly 6 a.m. And there is not an historical event that the sun sets at exactly 6 p.m. As far as the Bible and the spirit prophets are thus concerned, there are only two. That is in the creation week and in the time of Moses. Because it is God who control the suns, brothers and sisters, the heavenly bodies. But we are talking about, brothers and sisters, concerning the figurative vernal equinox. Now, I would like to read to you answerer number 3. On page 11, it says, answerer number 3, page 11. So, let us read. Thus was the Lord re-establishing the creation calendar, reaffirming that the year begins on the day of the vernal equinox. So the year begins on the day of the vernal equinox, on which spring, the first season of the year, commences, and on which the sun and the moon were created, the fourth day from the beginning of creation. When does the sun and the moon were created? Fourth day. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, so it is Wednesday. In the midst of the week. The sun, the moon, and the stars are created. So that is very plain, brothers and sisters. Then it says, the only point in time at which, in the very nature of things, the year could begin. And so it is that the Passover, the Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles, the three most important feasts in the year. It did not say the three most important feasts in a year, but inscribed in definite article, the three most important feasts in the year. And I would like to prove to you that that is pointing to the year of my redeemed. The most important feast, these three feasts, Passover, Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles. Why? Because Passover week, that is the purification of the church. The Day of Atonement, that is blotting out of names, blotting out of sins. Now, I would like to read. Why is it that these three feasts are very important? That important feast of, it says, the three most important feasts in the year. But what year? I would like to prove to you, the year 2021 and the year 2022. Now, let us read 2SR 216 concerning Passover. In observance of the Passover, the Lord commanded Israel to celebrate the occasion, that occasion 7 days. See Leviticus 23 verse 5 to 8. Surely no one would say that God commanded His people to commemorate that event 7 days with no object in view. Israel after the flesh going into Egypt, then out of Egypt to Mount Sinai, the Passover in Egypt on the night when the death angel smote the firstborn of men and beasts at the departure of Israel are types of the church at the present time, the church going out of Egypt, worldliness, the purification of the church, the separation of the tares from the wheat, the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. The spirit of prophecy bears witness of this by the following statement: the Passover was to be both commemorative and typical, not only pointing back to the deliverance from Egypt, but forward to the greater deliverance which Christ was to accomplish in freeing His people from the bondage of sin. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 277. So the Passover feast is very important because that is typical. That is very plain, right? But how about the Day of Atonement? It is also typical. Now let us read 2SR 218 and 219. It says, in the earthly sanctuary, the high priest entered the most holy apartment once a year. And on that particular day, every Israelite was to confess his sin. He who neglected to comply with the divine requirements was cut off from his people. Thus, the day of antitypical atonement, judgment, or cleansing of the sanctuary, as set forth in Daniel 8 verse 14, is a day of purification for the camp of Israel, the church, putting away sin and sinners. The earthly sanctuary was a figure of the heavenly. It was instituted with its ceremonial system to point forward to the work of Christ, our high priest, in the heavenly sanctuary during the antitypical period, New Testament time. As the sanctuary with all its services was a figure or type of the true heavenly under the administration of Christ. So the typical Day of Atonement must point out the truth, the antitypical period, our time. How about the Feast of Tabernacles? Let us read track number 3. Track number 3, page 82. Plainly, therefore, since the first and the second fruits of the literal harvest and its attendant rites foreshadowed a spiritual harvest of first and second fruits, they are to be climaxed by the antitypical Feast of Tabernacles. I saw the saints, says the servant of the Lord, in describing this celebration, leaving the cities and villages and associating together in companies and living in the most solitary places. Angels provided them food and water while the wicked were suffering from hunger and thirst. Early Writings, page 282. So these three feasts are very important. Passover, Day of Atonement, and Feast of Tabernacles. All of them are typical in the judgment that pertains to the living. Now let us continue reading here in answerer number 3, page 11. It says, the three most important feasts in the year, besides other feasts, are controlled by the solar year and by the lunar month, the weekly Sabbath by the day in which creation began, and the year itself by the vernal equinox, the immovable signpost. Answerer number 3, page 11. What is the immovable signpost? The word immovable meaning fixed. It could no longer be moved. Brethren, it is closely connected to Revelation 6 verse 6. Because the Lord Jehovah God fixed the price of the cereals. Closely connected with that statement, immovable signpost. Our signpost to the kingdom. What is our signpost? The vernal equinox. But not literal. The symbolical vernal equinox. The fulfillment of that statement that the time of salvation was divided into two equal parts. 12 hours in the nighttime and 12 hours on the daylight. Now, as far as the shepherd's rod is thus concerned, brothers and sisters, the perfect fulfillment, I would like to read 2SR. In 2SR page 216, it says, what made the interruption and brought about the change? Let us first determine the length of the prophetic half-hour time. A day in prophetic time stands for a year. Ezekiel 4 verse 6. 1 hour is 24th part of a prophetic year, and figurative and figuring 30 days to a month, it would be about 2 weeks. Half an hour would be half of 2 weeks, therefore 7 literal days. Now 1 hour in this reading consists of, brothers and sisters, 1 hour consists of, in fulfillment of the prophecy, 15 days. But Revelation 8 verse 1, it says about half an hour. That's why only 7 days. Because it did not say exactly half an hour. So, in that case, brothers and sisters, the symbolical vernal equinox must be equivalent to 1 year because 24 hours brothers and sisters times 15 equals 360 days. So it must be pointing to the last year. allotted by God to His people. Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary. Now, I would like to show to you first, because we already here we have a little diagram, creation week. We call it the creation week. Creation week. Diagram. 202. Now, I would like to read first answerer. Number 3. On page 8. The light which shone on the first day, and by which God divided the day from the night, set the earth revolving on its axis, was not, however, that of the sun. For the sun and the moon were not created until the fourth day, when He spoke them forth to rule over the day and over the night. Genesis 1 verse 18, which He had beforehand established. Thus it was that, whereas the earth began punctuating eternal time with the first night of creation week, from which the weekly seventh-day Sabbath is measured, the moon began punctuating time at the end of the third day, and at the beginning of the fourth night, from which the month is measured, and the sun began to punctuate time at the end of the fourth night, and the beginning of the fourth day, from which the year is measured. So that is the statement, brothers and sisters. Now let us look at now. What is the statement? When does the moon began to punctuate? The diagram. At the beginning of the fourth night. The beginning of the fourth night. So, we need to count. Brothers and sisters, this is Sunday. Of course, the one that night is the beginning of the 24 hours. This is the first night. Then on Monday, second night. And in Tuesday, third night. So, where is that? So this is the fourth, or the moon began to punctuate on 6 p.m. 6 p.m. sunset on Tuesday. And that is the fourth night. Brothers and sisters, the fourth night from creation. So that is the time by which the moon began to punctuate at 6 p.m. But the sun began to punctuate on the fourth day from creation. So, this is the first sunrise, 6 a.m. on Wednesday, 6 a.m. The daylight during Wednesday. So, this is the time by which the sun began to punctuate. Remember, brothers and sisters, we already read in the Mount of Blessings in page 46 that the light that cometh from the moon is derived from the sun. The moon itself has no light. The light in the sun is only reflected cometh from the sun. Brothers and sisters. So, the question is that the statement that the moon began to punctuate in the fourth night of creation, the word punctuate is the moon began to revolve. But at that time, the moon has no light as yet because the sun did not begin to punctuate not until 6 a.m. on Wednesday. The sun, brothers and sisters, is not revolving. It is steady, the sun. So the word punctuate to the sun is giving light. Brothers and sisters, the sun is giving light. So, you can see in the creation week that the first 3 days, the first 3 nights, or the first 3 nights and 3 days, although there are, in the nighttime there is light, and on the daylight there is light, but the light during that first 3 nights and 3 days does not derive from the sun and the moon, because the sun and the moon were not as yet created at that time. We need to connect our subject to the creation week because it is also closely connected to the woman which is clothed with the sun. In the symbolization of Revelation 12, the moon, the sun, and the stars are used in that symbolization of that woman. The woman has crown of 12 stars. The moon is under her feet. And the woman is clothed with the sun. So that is very plain, brothers and sisters. Now, but in the just referring only to the days of creation, because on the 7th day, that is the rest day. So the last 3 nights and 3 days in the creation week, of course, the light during the nighttime derived from the moon, and the light that lighted during the daytime derived from the sun. And accordingly, the Bible represents the sun. How about the moon? If the sun in the representation is represented by reading materials, then brothers and sisters, the moon must also be reading materials. Although there is a representation of the moon which is represented by the church. But in this study, we do fully believe that the moon, brothers and sisters, must be the writings of the spirit of prophecy, or those inspired writings outside the Bible. That all the light, whether in the writings of Sister White, Shepherd's Rod Publications, or whether writings of Alonzo Jones, Wagoner, William Miller, and all his associates, all of them are derived from the sun, which is the Bible. Without the Bible, brothers and sisters, there is no light on those writings. But the light during the first 3 nights and 3 days is represented by Jesus Christ himself. I am the light of the world. John 8 verse 12. And Jesus Christ is called the Son of Righteousness. The Son of Righteousness, brothers and sisters. Now, let us, I would like to show to you, to prove that, let's go back again to our illustration, brothers and sisters. 201, the diagram 201. So, in this diagram, from 4000 BC to 1500 BC, it is symbolized by nighttime. According to the Great Controversy, introduction, page 5, during the 2,500 years, there was no written revelation, and Brother Hotep says that is represented by the nighttime. But the daylight, from 1500 BC to 100 AD, which is the New Testament, from the time the Bible began to be written to the time it was finished, there are 1,600 years. Therefore, it is not equal. So, it could not be the period of time which is called the vernal equinox, because the vernal equinox, it must be a period of time by which the night time and the daylight are equal. So the particular object in view in Matthew 20 could not be applied in this period of time from 4000 BC to 100 AD. And we call it autumn, because that is in autumn by which God, the sowing time. Brothers and sisters, the period of the sowing time. Now here, from 100 AD to 1530, we call it the night time. Because this is the period of the commencement when all the apostles died, the church began to decline and spiritual darkness. I will no longer be reading, brothers and sisters, because we read that several times. And it was in 1530 AD that the light from the Bible began to shine, according to the Shepherd's Rod. And that is in the time of Martin Luther. So here, from 1530 to October 10, 1843, or October 21, 1844. This is the daytime, and in October 21, 1844, that is sunset. What is sunset? Close of provision, pointing to the shut door message in October 22, 1844. And what seal is that? The fifth seal. The close of provision under the fifth seal. So, here, brothers and sisters, we called it the night time. From October 21, 1844, up to October 10, 1931, Bible calendar. October 10, 1843 to October 10, 1931. July 18, 1931. Why is it that we always use the Day of Atonement, October 10? Because since 1844, it is called the antitypical Day of Atonement. From one Day of Atonement to the other. there are three symbolization of this period of time equal 31,680 days. 31,680 days equal. The night time and the daylight are equal. It is also perfectly corroborating to the typical period of Laodicean and the antitypical period of Laodicean. This period is called the typical period of Laodicean. This one is antitypical period of Laodicean. It is also perfectly corroborating to the subject of the woman. Because the woman, God gave her two wings of a flying eagle. And eagle represent the judgment that pertains to the living. 2 SR 196. So, the two wings, according to the shepherd's rod, represent two periods of time. And that periods of time is represented by the typical period of Laodicean and the antitypical period of Laodicean. And it was ended on October 10, 2019. And I will elaborate this diagram on our next episode, brothers and sisters. And this is the symbolical period of time which is called spring. Because this for prophecy called the dark ages of religion here as the period of winter. And of course, the next period to follow after winter is spring. Right? When does, brothers and sisters, the year could begin? On spring. According to answerer number 3, page 10. The one we read, brothers and sisters. And this is the fulfillment of that predicted event from 1844 onwards. But we are talking about the period in the judgment that pertains to the living. So here, brothers and sisters, why is it that there are two occurrences in the past? Vernal equinox. Because it points out to the antitype. Brothers and sisters, this is the vernal equinox and this is the antitypical vernal equinox. But the focal point is the summer, the symbolical period of summer. Which is directly applied to the harvest of the first fruits in Jeremiah 8 verse 20 when it says, the harvest is past, meaning the sealing of the 144,000 is finished. I would like to read to you here in White House Recruiter. On page 38, it says, then is the harvest of the first fruits past. White House Recruiter, page 38. The fruits garnered in, and the tares shut out unto destruction. There in agony to wail and to gnash their teeth. The harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not saved. So, brothers and sisters, if you will notice, the first three 3 nights and the first 3 days and the last 3 nights and the last 3 days, or the 72 hours is pointing exactly to the event during the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. 3 days and 3 nights. Brothers and sisters, and closely connected to the subject of the fifth trumpet, the darkening of the sun, by which B.T. Hotep attached Isaiah 60, verse 1 and 2, in White House Recruiter, page 15. So Isaiah 60, verse 1 and 2, brothers and sisters, the earth mentioned there is the symbolical earth. And without any doubts, that coming Day of Atonement, March 27, 2021, there is gross darkness that will occur in the entire symbolical earth. Gross darkness, spiritual darkness. Let us read again that statement. And we know that I would like to let me see. Remember, brothers and sisters, according to the White House Recruiter, page 15, Isaiah 60, verse 2, let's read again. It says, finally, the night following the day. Let us go back again to our diagram. So, this is the day. Here. So, March 27, 2021, that is sunset. That is sunset, brothers and sisters. So, and this is the fulfillment, or October 10, 2022. So, let us read this statement. Finally, the night following the day can only represent the period after the gospel work is finished. And that is one of the significance, right? God bestowed unto His servant to become ruler over all His goods. To SR 179. The significance of to make ruler over all His goods first is finishing of the gospel. And that finishing of the gospel is pointing to the complete unfoldment of the plan of redemption. It says, finally, the night following the day can only represent the period after the gospel work is finished. After provision for man's salvation is closed. Then as the light of the world, the word of God, sinks beyond the horizon of the day, darkness covers the earth and gross darkness the people. But this, that night, which is spiritual darkness, it is also predicted beforehand that that is the time that the stars will shine its brightness. The predicted event in volume 5, page 81, that in the nighttime we will behold its genuine luster. That is the time by which the true people of God will be disclosed to view. It says, it is the time which finds the destiny of every being forever fixed. What time is that? Track 1528, Day of Atonement. Then follows the Lord's irrevocable finality. Revelation 22 verse 11. In the writings of Sister White, that is the time when Jesus Christ will return to the most holy place and clothe himself with the garments of vengeance. Volume 2, page 190. So that statement in White House Recruiter, page 15, in connection to the vision of Sister White, here in volume 2, page 190, it says, what time is he referred to? Not to the revelation of Christ in the clouds of heaven to find a people asleep. No, but to his return from his ministration in the most holy place of the heavenly sanctuary, when he lays off his priestly attire and clothed himself with garments of vengeance, and when the mandate goes forth, he that is unjust, let him be unjust still, and he which is filthy, let him be filthy still, and he that is righteous, let him be righteous still, and he that is holy, let him be holy still. Volume 2, page 190 and 191. And that is pointing to the last and the final day of atonement in the holy place. And then Jesus Christ will lace off his priestly attire and clothe himself with the garments of vengeance. And Jesus Christ will return to the most holy place. And that is the time that Jesus Christ pleaded with God the Father that to hold the winds, because God's servants, the 144,000 living saints, are not yet protected and guarded. So we will continue this subject, brothers and sisters, and hoping that you will abide listening and viewing this program. And gradually we will show to you that there is no other day of atonement except this coming day of atonement, the last and the final day of atonement. And hoping that we will prepare our lives, brothers and sisters, the most important is that we could ascertain clearly that our names will be retained in the Lamb's Book of Life. So thank you very much for listening and viewing this program. May the good Lord bless you and have a beautiful, wonderful evening.